You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio. So hi everyone and welcome back to another episode of Changing Reality. We're thrilled to have you back with us again on this lovely Thursday. So welcome all, welcome. And if for all of you who may be tuning into Changing Reality for the first time, Changing Reality is a show on WQHS Radio that features phenomenal people from all walks of life who are in essence changing their own reality. So we'll be hanging out and interviewing social change makers, entrepreneurs, top executives, thought leaders, to even business owners, artists, musicians, and inspiring individuals from all across the board and all across the world as well. So by hearing these inspiring stories on how they change the world around them, hopefully it will give us some inspiration how we can take those little nuggets of wisdom and change the things that we want to in our own stories too. And I'm someone who truly believes in the power of sharing these experiences, sharing these stories. And I wanted to do this show simply because I feel like there are so many people out there who are making waves in the lives of those around them. And I'm just passionate about uncovering those hidden gems so that as we learn from their experiences, we can build on it and continue to grow for a better, brighter future. Personally, I founded and run a youth movement called Ascendance in Malaysia, which is where I'm from. And it collaborates with global organizations, even the Malaysian Ministry of Education, to help provide alternative education platforms for any student who wants to change their own reality. So we work with students from elementary all the way up to college through various sessions, programs, experiential learning activities, and projects that help them discover their passion, learn about the world around them, and use that experience, those information that they get from these hands-on projects to start their own careers while they're still in school. And the core of this, the core of all that we do is stories. So to date, through the power of these stories, through enabling them to have these hands-on experiences, we've been able to impact over 15,000 students in 970 communities across 7 countries, with another 50,000 students joining us actually this weekend with our New Age Dinner Conference for young Gen Zs from across the globe tuning in. So if you have any questions about it, do drop it in the chat below. If you guys have any suggestions of stories that you want to uncover, of topics that you want to talk about, let us know as well. And we'll see how we can add that to our show. Today's speaker is someone who, personally, if you're watching, you are in for a really, really amazing conversation. His journey is one of the most inspiring that I've personally heard. And as someone with over 20 years of experience in the marketing communications industry, he is definitely a thought leader that you have to listen to. With the passion for nurturing and inspiring teams, growing businesses, developing trusted relationships with clients, he knows not only how to bring together the best in the PR agency world, but at the same time has a global position where he works cross continents to actually bring those marketing solutions to his beloved clients. Our speaker today is the Global Chief Growth Officer at Virtue, a Vice Media Group company in New York, and has been recognized and named by prominent awarding bodies from across the globe, including Financial Times and Yahoo Finance's top 100 ethic minority executive leaders. And he's been receiving awards like this for several consecutive years. Without further ado, let's bring onto our screen with us the amazing human being who will definitely inspire us all, welcoming Mr. Suresh Raj.
Hello, Harsha. Sorry, I was on mute. That was an amazing introduction. Thank you so much. I hope I can do it justice.
Thank you so much for joining us. How's the weather in New York? How are you doing today?
We're just entering autumn, so it's like my favorite season of the year. So it's lovely. It's absolutely lovely. And I also have my dog with me. So just in case he barks, that's the audience that I have here. So apologies.
No, that's terrible. If he barks, the cuteness will steal the show, and then
Yeah, exactly.
the audience is gonna pay attention to us. So bring in the adorableness. We'll get to that later if we've got time. But thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. One thing I didn't mention in your introduction, which is a major spoiler and probably will I don't know. You may or may not want the audience to know this, but we share the same hometown. We're both from Kuala, Malaysia. So as someone who was from the same place as you are, and seeing the amazing journey that you've had, as I mentioned, it's incredibly inspiring. And
Okay.
you've gone on to be a literal rock star in the whole PR agency. I'm not joking. I think you even nominated for a rock star award once. So
Yes, I was. Embarrassingly, yes.
I don't know. I think it's a pretty good award to win. So, like, I have to ask in a way, did you know that your life would turn out from this when you were just a boy in Kluang? Was this the
Oh,
grand plan? Was this the
wow.
vision? Or was this something that you stumbled across?
Oh, wow. No, I had no, I had no inkling that this was going to be my life today. In fact, my sister lives here as well in the US, and her kids are American. And we often literally, we come from this tiny little small town called Kluang back in Johor. And never in a million years did I think this is where my life would end up. And I literally saw it as someone who would just be, brought up in Malaysia, and that was going to be my home. And I was very lucky and, was very blessed and got an opportunity to go and pursue my education in the UK. And that was the turning point. And I embraced it. And I had no inkling that I'd end up in the US after over 21 years in the UK. The opportunity came up and I literally grabbed it with both hands and came here. I've been here now for 7 years, so coming up to 7 years in New York, and this is now home. And it's no, literally, if I'm being honest, I didn't even quite have a life plan because I was going through a lot as an individual growing up in Kluang, and I'll be very transparent about this. And how in Malaysia, culture, one of the things that's important, culture is parents being together and family, etc. And my parents separated. My parents got a divorce, and which was very, very rare, particularly in the period of time that I grew up in Malaysia. And so like I had to learn a whole new life. Like, I was of mixed parentage. I'm half Malay, half Indian, and I had to embrace religion and culture and family separation, which was taboo in society at that point, and then just realize I had to embrace life and find a whole new definition of what my journey was going to be. And I think that was the secret, being open to embracing whatever was going to come and making the best out of that.
Amazing. We're already off to a very deep start. You're going to make me tear before I even ask my second question. So I'm sure you've got that planned. But anyway, you mentioned that there was this time or this somewhat of a turning point in that initial stages where you went and you studied overseas in the UK. If I'm not mistaken, you went to Middlesex University. You did a BA in, if I'm not mistaken, media or something along that range.
Yeah.
And many people go overseas. Many people study abroad. They get a job abroad. They don't end up as amazing and crazily successful as you. Some of them come back. They do well here. Tell us about your time there, like going there in a new country, again, from a very small town, and then now being thrown into London, a beautiful place, an extremely exciting place for all of us who've only seen it on the telly before. So how was that initial experience was like for you? And what was kind of like the mindset you had going in, and how did that change over your years studying there?
Very good question. And I think for me, I talk about just feeling very different and quite unaccepted, actually, in a way, growing up in Malaysia. And I don't know whether this is controversial, but my family went through a lot of religious persecution in Malaysia. So we were born into a Muslim family who converted to Christianity, and it was obviously, as you can appreciate, in Malaysia, a Muslim country, and my mother was Malay, was supposed to be Muslims, and we became Christians. There was a lot of persecution and trial and tribulation, and that in addition, also in that generation, being of mixed marriage was also culturally problematic because both sides of the family didn't quite accept, and so we as the kids were always seen as almost like not pure, right? And I think just growing up in that context, and I was going through my own personal struggles as an individual, identifying who I was and understanding my place in this world. And so when the opportunity came, and I literally landed, I remember I had a dark blue plastic suitcase, which I dragged on two wheels, and I had a small hand luggage. And when I arrived at Heathrow in London, I remember this is my moment. Like, I'm going to embrace it because it was a chance to rewrite my story and rewrite my history. And there was a part of me that's incredibly nervous because I didn't know anything. I arrived on my own. I didn't know anyone. And in fact, interesting story. So when I actually arrived at the university, I was the very first student to arrive on campus. It was Trent Park in North London. Very first student to arrive on campus, and this was 1994 September. And I was the only person on campus for about 2 days. Literally, the only other people around were security guards, and it's a very big campus, so you didn't see anyone. But also, what I later found out was that campus, which is a beautiful, beautiful campus north of London, and beautiful, it was a old mansion that belonged to Lord Byron, who was a famous poet
Oh,
laureate,
okay.
converted to university, and the dorms, etc., were there. And there's beautiful landscape gardens, and whenever it is not academic years, they would rent out the place. So one day I just walked around the campus and I sat down. And I saw two huge limousines right in front of the, like, beautiful stretched limousines in front of the mansion. And I just sat there and wondering, oh, that's a bit curious, like, because there are no students. And about 20 minutes later, the Hollywood actors and actresses, Goldie Hawn and Richard Gere, walk in front of me. Literally get in, and of course they're both
And this
looking at
is like
me.
your first week in
This is
London.
my first 3 days in London, and literally they're both looking at me a bit odd because what's this Asian guy doing sitting on a bench right in front of our cars? Anyway, I didn't say anything. I'm just like gobsmacked seeing them, right? And they go into their cars, and it turns out the guy that comes up after that was the Dalai Lama. So the Dalai Lama was giving, as you know, Goldie Hawn and Richard Gere, Buddhists, and the Dalai Lama was basically doing like private sessions and lectures, etc. And they happened to do it in Bevan Hall, which is one of the halls on the campus, because it's set in this beautiful grounds with a big Japanese garden in the back. It's all beautifully, beautifully set, and it's so far away from central London, so it's very private. Except they didn't anticipate to see this young Malaysian kid sitting next, exactly, this young Malaysian kid sitting. So that was my first experience of London. I'm thinking, God, this is so surreal. No one will believe this moment. But for me, I think what I was so ready for was to see a different world, because I grew up in an environment up to this point there where you grew up in a prescriptive mold, right? Like, this is your culture. You should be doing this. These are your plan, life plans, and etc. And one thing I realized was, and I not necessarily like I didn't defy my parents, but I justified to my parents that I wasn't cut out to be an accountant, lawyer, a doctor, or a engineer. Those were like the four paths for me, right? And growing up in an Asian culture, and I went, well, I wanted more. I wanted something that I was passionate in. And I had a brief and brush with experience in the music industry. And one thing I realized was actually I love the media side of things. And there's something intriguing about that. And I'd love to do it. And my parents always said to me, what are you going to do? Be a journalist? And I went, maybe I'll go around the world. I love the idea of traveling, seeing different cultures. And I wanted to embrace that. So the good thing my parent allowed me to do was pursue that passion. So that's when I did media and cultural studies as my first degree. And what I was ready for was to embrace new cultures, new people who had a different mindset about what being yourself meant. And that was one thing I loved and experienced when I was in London, was the openness to literally just be myself.
You know, there's two things that I've got to address. I mean, the first part is that whole like being ready for a new culture, being ready for a new adventure in a sense. And I feel like, especially as someone who you grow up watching all these TV shows set in like New York or London. And I remember that as a kid, I used to tell my mom that I used to tell my kindergarten teacher that I was English because I watched too much Downton Abbey in kindergarten. And my kindergarten teacher had to call my mom. So it was like I can completely relate to kind of like that experience of like wanting to go to a place and like having a new life in a way, in a sense. And I think that your story is incredibly amazing. The second part I've got to address is the Dalai Lama part and the Richard Gere part, because that is absolutely insane. And the normal advice I hear from people is that don't expect to go like on the streets of New York and run into like celebrities, but you have obviously thwarted all expectation, and you are I would say, the expectation, or like the kind of like the opposite of every story that I've heard about moving across. So amazing experience. You mentioned also about this kind of like brush with being a musician. I read somewhere that after, in a way, your first day out of college, when you graduated, you actually went for this audition by MTV. And what's even more crazier is you actually got accepted. You were one out of, I think, 5 people who were accepted to be put into this band by MTV and toured around the country in a sense.
Hmm.
How do these impossible things happen to you? I think that's the first question I'll ask. And no, I'm serious. Please answer that. And I think the second thing is, tell us a bit about that story. I mean, it's something that we all dream of. Did it all pan
Yeah.
out like you expected it to? Like, were you living like keep it up with the Kardashians, or was it
Oh
something else?
God, totally not the Kardashians, but it was certainly, we all talk about having 15 minutes of fame in our lifetime, and I think that was my 15 minutes. It was a little more than 15 minutes, 2 years, but um, so before I left Malaysia, I was in a rock band. Actually, it's a Christian rock band called Josh Race. I was a very religious kid, but I also loved and embraced music. And my brother, sister, and me are very passionate about music. We're all musicians. And whilst at my first year of pre-university in KL, I joined this amazing Christian rock band called Josh Race. Um, you know, from being the backing vocalist on it, I ended up becoming a lead vocalist in the band. Did a lot of songwriting, actually recorded a number of my own tracks with the band, and and went around the country performing, and I loved it. I didn't just love the whole performance side of it. I love the songwriting side of it. I love the craft of it. But of course, again, one of the biggest challenges being brought up in a at that point, still very Asian culture. I grew up in a period where there was no social media. There's no embracing foreign culture in that way. What you saw in TV was what was known as popular culture. And at that point as well, it was incredibly censored, right? So for me, I only knew the experience I had, but I knew my passion for music. And so when I came over to the UK, I was walking around all the time singing. Like I love it was just me, right? I'd walk around the halls of residence, I'd just be singing, singing, singing. And my first brush with music was one of the girls, and I'll never forget her name, Susan Blackwell, and she was living in one of the rooms further down the hall in London in the dormitories. And she slipped under my dorm door a live audition, an in-person audition for a West End musical in London called Miss Saigon. And I don't know how familiar you are with it, with Miss Saigon. I'd never been to a musical. At this point, I didn't know what a musical was. And so I literally looked at it and thought, oh, well, I'll go and do it, because, and maybe this was this side of my naivety. Like, I've not been so influenced by life that I was actually looking at it in a very negative way. Everything was glass half full. Everything was positive. Everything was, hey, it's an opportunity. Do it. Go do it. Go embrace it. So I turn up at this West End theatre 2 days later. Literally didn't know the song, so overnight had to learn a very big song. It was for the supporting lead role for the musical. And I turn up, and and it's so funny because I have zero experience. All I know was I loved to sing. I loved to sing. And I turn up in Drury Lane, which is the theatre in central London. And by the way, if I'm going completely off tangent, please pull me back, but I'm just going to tell you the story. So I get into the theatre, and there's a massive queue of people. I'm the fifth or sixth person there, but there's a massive queue of people queuing up. And I looked around and I went, oh my God, these are actual professionals. They are all doing their warm-up voice, vocal lessons and stretching and doing the splits and everything. I'm like, hey, this kid that just got off the boat about a month and a half ago here in Drury Lane thinking I can sing. And I'd love to sing. And and it's so funny because everybody's bringing up this full A4 size headshots of them, professional pictures, etc., and their CVs of all the shows they've been on, and I've got zero, nothing. I had Christian rock band in Malaysia, just arrived in England a month and a half ago, and here I am in this audition. And they looked at me and they goes, okay, are you a member of Equity, which is Equity is a like a union for stage actors, etc. And I went, no, I didn't know what equity was. And he goes, well, do you have a headshot? I went, yes. And I pulled out my passport photograph from Malaysia. So literally, I gave them this passport, and they're looking at me going, is he being serious? Like, I went, yeah, that's all I have. I don't have a headshot. So I gave them my passport photograph. Anyway, I'm sitting down waiting to be called in for this audition by Sir Cameron Mackintosh. And again, I don't know anything, right? So I don't know the context of what a musical is. I don't know anything about these people. I'm just going there because I love it. I love the idea of being able to sing for my career. And I suddenly looked around me and thought, oh my God, what am I doing here? These people are real professionals. I'm a joke. Like, I should just get up and leave. So I literally get up and I'm about to walk out, and the door opens and the casting agent basically says, Suresh, you're next. And I went, oh, I'm here. I need to go in. So I get pulled into the theaters. I'm walking inside this West End theater, which is massively huge. And there's the only lights are on the engineer's desk where the mixing is happening, and there are the people there. And I later found out one of them was Sir Cameron Mackintosh sitting there. And then the spotlight on stage with the pianist. There's just one spotlight on stage. And this is a theatre that, I don't know, they probably fit 800, 1,000 people. It's a typical London West End theatre. So I go in there, and bearing in mind, I just learnt the song the night before, memorized the entire song. So I get up there and I say, I'm going to sing this called Buidoi, which is one of the signature songs in the musical. It's for the role I was trying to audition for. And he starts playing and I start singing. I remember the first 2 lines of the song and I don't remember anything else. So I made up the entire lyrics for the 3.5 minutes, however long the song goes on for, 4 minutes. I literally didn't skip a beat. I literally just made up all the words. There was a lot of rain. I have no idea. Every time you don't know lyrics, rain appears to be the lyrics. And I make up this entire song. And I remember thinking, all I remember thinking is, don't give up. Just keep singing. And that's what I told myself. And so the song finishes and this pianist gives me back the score, the music score. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that was so embarrassing. I got everything wrong. So I just went, I'm going to put a paper bag over my head and just walk straight out. So I'm walking down the steps and then literally this guy comes running. He goes, no, hold on. Comes running down. He goes, that was amazing. That was just amazing. You have such a raw voice. And he goes, like, where did you train? I went, in my bathroom. And he goes, you've never done this before? I went, no, this is completely the first time. And he goes, you've got the role. I want you in this role. We need you to start on Wednesday for your training. You have to come in the evenings, etc., to do all the rehearsals. And he goes, that was me. And it turned out to be Sir Cameron Mackintosh. And I'm like, was he paying attention at all? Did he listen to anything I was doing? Anyway, I start walking out, and the casting agent comes after me and said, and don't forget, please bring your paperwork, etc. Long story short, I had to turn down the role because I was there on a student visa and I couldn't just swap over to do West End musicals. But what it did spark on me was I knew I had something to give in the music industry. I had a talent that I thought was just something in my head, and I realized actually there was something when somebody as professional like this says that calls me out and says, you have something here. So I tried to negotiate with my parents. I'd like to do music, and they went, we sent you there to do education, you do education. So, I told myself, okay, I will do what my parents want me to do. So I ditched the whole West End experience and focused on getting my degree. And I was also a very studious kid, and I loved doing well in my education, so I really excelled in school. And the very next day after graduating, I did everything, right? So I did everything by the book. I graduated. The very next day, I saw a live open audition for MTV, putting a boy band together. And I went, that's my moment. So I didn't tell anyone, didn't tell my parents. I literally went and auditioned for this boy band. And it was basically the very first pan-European reality TV show in the music industry. If you think about the X Factors, the Fame Academies, the American Idols, and Britain's Got Talent, all of that. This was the very first show ever in the history of live audition and music shows. And they basically audition guys all over Berlin, somewhere in Sweden, I think Oslo, in Sweden, and London, to put a pan-European boy band together. And I didn't even have a TV at home. I didn't have MTV. So when I auditioned, all I knew was the audition, and then I went back home and they said we'll be in touch. And weeks went by and I didn't hear anything, so I just forgot it. And then I get a call from one of the DJs and said, "Look, we're going to call you tomorrow because we're announcing the results of the boy band." And like I had forgotten this 1 month later, and I went, I completely forgot about that show because I just auditioned, I was filmed, and that was it. And it turns out the next day they announce on this call that I'm the first of the 5 guys that won a place in this boy band. And the reason it took a month is because it was a live television show where people were voting in to keep the boy band members. So they just played the auditions and people were voting, the executive producers were voting, and I was one of the 5 guys. And then they launched us on a global stage in this concert in Germany called Popcom in Cologne in Germany. And I remember the moment, this was the moment that really redefined my life, I think, because I was, I was sharing a dressing room with Robbie Williams from Take That and the Spice Girls. They'd already had 2 number 1 hits at this point, a number of like Boyzone, all very British groups. And I remember thinking, my God, I'm a little kid from Kluang in Malaysia that nobody knows about. And this is so unreal. But I think it was the first time both my parents realized he probably has a bit of talent. Like for him to have done this, he has a talent, and they gave me the chance to just pursue this for a few years. So that's where my brush with music came, and what was difficult was actually sustaining it, because the one thing of the music industry, it's a tough industry, and it takes you a long time to really crack it. And so whilst I was doing music, I also struggled in terms of I didn't have a financial income. So whilst I was on TV doing shows, etc., I was also washing dishes in a Greek restaurant just to make ends meet, and and to put food on the table, which was tough. So that was my experience in the music industry.
Absolutely brilliant. And I have to ask this. I know I asked it earlier, but I'll reiterate this. Many people have talent. Many people have passion, but not everyone gets to where you got. Like even just like getting accepted into that audition, even just like making people run off you after you when you walk down the stage in a West End musical audition, or even I would argue as far as running into the Dalai Lama or Richard Gere. These things don't just happen. And I know some people are believers in luck, and I believe to an extent in luck as well. But one thing that's always stuck to me is luck. When my mentor used to say this, is opportunity meets preparation. And I think that that's something that for me always struck. And I have to ask, in a sense, with it's unlikely that so many good things happen to you without you doing anything extraordinary in order to attract them or at least utilize them. What was it about you that enabled you to use your talent, that enabled you to push through and actually achieve these successes?
I think 2 things: belief in myself, and discipline. If I'm being honest, actually, those are, if I were to say those 2 things, and they still are my mantra, belief and discipline. So I don't believe anything is impossible. I think there are many challenges in life, right? Multiple challenges, and we all face them in different shapes, sizes, guises, and all. But if you have a fixed belief on focusing on what you want to achieve, what you want out of life, nothing should really stop you, whatever your circumstance. So, today my career took a massive pivot from being in the music industry into the marketing communications industry. And I've loved it. I've embraced it because, this was going to be my fallback career, but it wasn't a fallback career in terms of, oh, well, if I really don't make it, I'm going to do this. I went, well, I had to the point of discipline, I had a plan in that way. And my plan was, if I could pursue my music, fantastic. If I can't pursue, this is what I'd like to do. And I had option number 2. But whatever the path is, you need to have discipline. You can't just go and assume things will fall into your lap and make things happen. You've got to put in the effort. You've got to put in the work. So yes, whilst time with the music experience was fantastic, it was grueling. The hours were difficult. And you were always at someone's beck and call. You didn't have a life of your own. You were controlled by the management company, by the recording label, by the stage people, etc. You literally went where they pointed you. At the same time, in terms of career, my day starts at 4:45 in the morning. My calls end at about 9, 10 at night every day. Yes, that's not necessarily a healthy work-life balance, but it at a certain level, when you're pushing for growth in your career, it takes a lot of discipline. And for me, I think the combination of having faith and belief in yourself, in the environment that you are, to make things happen is one thing. Being disciplined helps make those realities happen, I think.
Absolutely amazing. And I think you've spelled out the formula in the name of the show of how you change reality. Very, very simply put. And I'm so glad that this conversation actually can be heard by many people who may be in that position or maybe aspiring to achieve maybe a fraction of the success in one of the many careers that you've had in a way. You mentioned you pivot as well, like I like that part about pivoting from music to the whole communications industry. I see the connection a little bit, but what was the moment that you realized that okay, like, or in a sense when you decided, all right, I'm not going to do this anymore? How did you know that this industry was the next thing for you? Was it just like a step revealed itself, when the student is ready, the next thing appears, or did it literally, or did you just one day, I don't know, walk into like event and saw a flyer for communications and like interview and say, oh, I'm going to try that instead?
Actually, it was very related to the music industry. So when I was part of the boy band and I went on to have a solo career with a few record labels myself in London, I was very being in the music industry. You're always thrown into the media, right? So you have to do interviews, you have to speak to them, you have to go for your they write on the music and the band and what's happening, etc. So I started to see, as a band member, as one of the boy band members, I used to see, God, that's actually a really interesting career as well. So the journalists used to come interview us, and I went, wow, I actually quite like that part about being in the media, right? And I didn't know, at this point, I had no experience in communications. I just remember thinking, well, that's actually quite a fun career as well. So that's my, because people always say, are you either a left brain or a right brain? I think I'm a combination of both, right? So I've got a creative side of me, which is the music, the songwriting, the arts, but I also have a very methodical sort of, I can't remember, is it left or right that is creative, and the other one is much more
But an
methodical.
amalgamation of both, like most
Yeah.
geniuses are. Yes.
I'm not sure about genius, but I feel like I've got a balance of both, and the theoretical and methodical side of me went, well, if that would be my fallback career, I kind of like what's happening in this whole meeting with the journalists. And I didn't have a name or a definition for it because I didn't understand that career. But what played to it was I obviously had a grounding in it because I'd done my degree in media and cultural studies, so there was an element of media in there that was involved. And so when I got personally quite disillusioned with the music industry, and I think as we briefly chatted a bit before, I was basically being made use of within the music industry. And it was very difficult. I was an Asian artist trying to break mainstream music, and it would not. It was very difficult to do so because the very few Asian artists broke mainstream, and I'm going back to 1990 something, right? So mid 90s, which never really happened. And so they would always, the songwriters would write songs and say, okay, but we'll focus Suresh in the Asian community of Britain or Asian community across Europe, and although I sang English songs, all my songs had an Asian type influence to the music. So the main pop songs, but they had Asian instruments, etc. I couldn't just be Suresh who sang pop songs. Like, it was Suresh, the Asian artist, and that was very frustrating. And then one day when I found out, I was being managed by quite a number of famous people in the UK, but I never saw a cent out of it. Never saw any money from it, and I was getting tired of it being sort of used in that way. And that was the moment when this isn't the career for me. 2 years in, and I can't even afford a meal. That was a problem. And I thought, well, what do I know? What do I do? What skill set do I have? And I remember thinking, I love the media side of it. I loved communications. And I had deferred a place to do my MBA. So I went, you know what? I'm going to go back, do my MBA, get focused, get a business. And part of me, I thought, what would be really strong is that if I came out with beyond just a media and communications degree or cultural studies degree, but I also combined it with a business aptitude with having an MBA. So I had both a BA honors and an MBA. And when I sort of did the course, and again, to my point earlier, I was very studious. I loved doing well in whatever I did, being the focus and the sort of belief in the discipline, right? Focus, belief, and discipline. I excelled at my MBA, and during the MBA, there was an internship that cropped up with a PR agency in London. I went, I'll just go and apply and do it. I'm going to go apply, again, just believing in myself. I want to go improve myself. And I did. I did the interview, and there was a brilliant opportunity for me to start as an intern, and I took it. And when I did start my career in PR, I remember thinking, oh my God, this is so much fun. Because I got to become the PR person that brings the journalist and the, whatever, the brand or the celebrity, etc., together and create a great story. And I loved, what I realized is I love the art of storytelling. I love the craft of storytelling. And because I believe, telling the right stories, you actually get to the title of the show, you get to change a lot of realities. And like today, this is storytelling between you and me, Harsho. We're storytelling and trying to actually shape a narrative and also tell the story of what actually happened in an individual's life that can hopefully change the reality of other people, right? So for me, I love that aspect of what communications really allowed me to become and do. And so I literally excelled at being a media relations. That's what I did most of all. It was literally telling stories of brands and people in the media.
Absolutely brilliant. And you mentioned you got this internship with a PR company. It was one of the biggest PR companies in the UK, Consolidated PR. And as we were chatting earlier, and you mentioned this, you actually started off with this internship, and that internship springboarded a 10-year-long career in this company. So you definitely did something outstanding during that internship, if I may say, in order to kind of like set that stage for success. And it wasn't just like a random ABC company, huge name, huge clientele. So for you, like from your point of view, what do you think you did differently in that role? And how did you actually come about it? Did your experience being a musician prior to that help you in any way, in the way that you thought? I mean, a lot of people, they straight away go for internships right out of college. A lot of them, they work all their life and they try in that corporate world to kind of level up. You went out there, did music, did an MBA, had a very unconventional path, and yet came in and rocked this internship and springboarded your career. How did that happen in a sense?
So going back to the two pillars that I believe in, which is belief in self and discipline, the one thing that really stood out for me in the music industry was the fact that I had to just be brave, right? So I remember the first concert we were thrown into as a boy band with these 5 guys, 2 guys from England, 1 guy from Berlin, 1 guy from Sweden, and myself. We were just in front of thousands of people, right? So in Cologne, I think there were about 5 or 10,000 people, a crowd that we're performing on the stage, and it was telecast to 35 million people live on MTV, this show. And that was my very first concert with the boy band. And then we subsequently did a lot of gigs and stuff all over the world. There was no such thing as actually not being brave, because you're constantly meeting people. You have to throw yourself, and you have to be this live, animated person. And I realized, and this is where my history in music. So back in Malaysia, when I was part of the band, although it's a very Christian band, we performed in religious sort of organizations or places. It gave me a sense of being brave. Like, I have to embrace it. And if this is the career and the passion I have, is music was to entertain. You don't sit down in a shower and sing to yourself. Yes, I do that these days, but you are out there and performing, and you have to be vulnerable to be able to take criticism, because not everybody's going to like your music. Some people like, some people hate it, and being able to be brave that way. And I remember when I started at the PR agency, there were maybe about 80 of us when I started. And I remember the first meeting. So every Monday, the whole company comes together, stands around the main sort of room, and they share great news from the company, etc. And I looked around, and I remember thinking, I was the only person who was non-white in this company, right? I was the very first non-white employee in this business, and everybody around me was white. And if you remember, I'm an intern, first day in my career, in an agency in London, surrounded by all white people, and there were 2 options. I can be scared completely and shut down, or I said, this is my moment to stand out. So I chose the moment to stand out. And I told myself, I'm going to excel at everything I do so that, like, I want to be the next person who shares during the Monday morning meeting about this great piece of coverage that I spoke to journalists about and helped achieve, etc. And I think that sense of belief and bravery just pushed me into being much more prominent. Not prominent in a look at me, showy sort of way, but, and this is where I think is really, and I think, and I say this because I come from that part of the world, being Asian, there's an innate aptitude to work hard because it's drilled into us by our family and our parents. Study, do well, focus and deliver. And I always had that in me. So I always wanted to study, do well, focus and deliver. And in my that aptitude I also took into my career. I wanted to actually deliver a good job, which meant it was not about I wanted to be in the limelight. I focused on being the best that I could to deliver the best work I could. And the one thing that maybe was the wind beneath my wings was the fact that my work spoke for spoke for me, right? So I delivered great work, and the delivery of great work just pulled me out from behind the ranks to front of the ranks. And so people say, actually, if you need a great media relations person, let's fly Suresh and get Suresh on this account. So I was always pulled in to troubleshoot on different accounts that needed help to drive media coverage, and that literally started to propel me much more front facing within the business. And I think that was one of the reasons my career really took off there. And after about 5 years of doing pure PR, I actually turned to what I call the dark arts of business development, because I love to speak to new clients. And that's the music side of it, right? You have to be brave. You go out and you approach people and you embrace whether they like you or you don't. You need to know the art of crafting relationships and connections. And that is where the music side of it really played a lot of business, because I wasn't afraid to be on stage and connect and in a room, go around, mingle with the journalists, mingle with people. And so I took that art to actually working as leading business development. And that has been my career for the last sort of 20 something years.
So in a way, you could take the musician out of the stage, but you could not take the stage out of the musician. And I think that that's amazing.
100%.
And I feel like many times we look down on the skills that the arts can teach us, but I feel like you just showed us, and maybe it's just the Asian in me who's been hearing too many people say that, but I think you broke anyone who has that perception. And that I feel like you are a perfect example that the things that we learn from music, from the arts, from theater, those skills build us and help us excel in everything that we do. And I think that
100%.
that you painted it very beautifully. And there's so many amazing things that you've done, so many awards. Again, nominated for Rockstar Award, that itself should be kind of like telling. That, and over a 20-year-long career, I'm sure you've worked on so many interesting, fascinating projects. Some of the firms that you worked at focus on companies, other focused on individuals. Tell us about one account that you worked on, one project that you worked on that really defined your career, defined you as a person in a sense.
Okay. It will have to be the same company, right? So I've had the privilege of working some of the world's largest companies right now. Vice Media Group's the biggest digital media publishing in the world. I was the most senior growth lead at Ogilvy, which is the biggest advertising business in the world. But I think the one experience that really stands out, and there are so many great experiences in terms of working with brands, but one that really stood out was one that actually defined me as an individual. And I realized for the first time I stood up for something I believed in, was in my very first company, the one I was there for 10 years. And I was very junior, so this was probably about 2 years into my career. I had this amazing opportunity to work on an account that took me to China quite a few times. And here's a young guy who's, just started his career 2 years in and has been flown to China a number of times. I was in Guangzhou and Beijing. And I didn't think about the brand I was working with. And that was where my ignorance was. I was thinking more about the actual campaign and the inspiration for the campaign. It was a campaign called the Inspirational Campaign for the brand 555 that was owned by British American Tobacco. So at that stage in my life and my career, I didn't have any qualms about working with tobacco because I never thought about it. I remember thinking, oh, this is a great campaign. I want to work on this, and it takes me to China. It's so interesting, etc. And the pinnacle of the campaign was a trip to Beijing where I was working with the second man on the moon, that ever walked the moon, which is Buzz Aldrin, and it was a career-defining moment, like sharing the moment with Buzz Aldrin himself.
Absolutely.
And
I think
actually,
in his case, there's literally no one who's more out of this world than he is. But yeah.
exactly. And actually, at the same campaign, I forgot, I also worked with the Oscar-winning composer, Tan Dun. Tan Dun was the guy who wrote the score to Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Hero, etc. And Tan Dun was, won the Oscar for that. And he was the other inspirational campaign figure that I worked with in Beijing. And if you imagine this, right, this is a young guy from Kluang, like thrown into this moment to actually work with these people, and that just so inspired me, like, oh my god, I'm working with unbelievable people doing this in the early stage of my career, and it was amazing. And we delivered this amazing campaign, again, never thinking that I'm working for a cigarette brand. I was more focused, and the campaign was not about selling cigarettes. The campaign was about finding inspirational ideas and people who can help revolutionize China's burgeoning economy. So people who are involved in climate change, people who are involved in sustainability, people who are involved in urban
All the things you
regeneration.
think about when
So
you think of
all the
cigarettes.
nice
Yeah.
things, right? So all the nice things, but I kept forgetting that, but it's been powered and sponsored by a cigarette brand. And where tobacco money isn't necessarily all very ethical, but I was too young, I was ignorant about that aspect of it, and I was focused on just the campaign. So I did a great delivery of this campaign, and on the flight back from Beijing, because it was via Schiphol in Amsterdam, I was in Schiphol airport for my connecting flight, and I picked up a newspaper, which is a British newspaper called The Times, and front page of The Times was this war that at that point happening in Cambodia, and the rebel group was led by a 12-year-old boy. He may even been younger, maybe even 10. But remember, it was a ridiculously young kid, 10 or 12 years old, but he was the leader of the rebel force, right? So the rebel army. And he was standing in this picture of, I think there was the carcass of an animal or something like that he was standing on. He looked disheveled, covered in dirt, and his grown-up adult rebel force behind him. And he's standing there with an M16, a helmet in army fatigues, and a cigarette in his lips, and he's smoking. And it wasn't the brand I just worked on, but I remember looking at this and thinking, oh my god, like, what am I doing? I just worked on a cigarette brand, and this is what I see on a front page. And obviously, it was a devastating story because it was a very devastating time for the country. And I remember thinking that somewhere in this cycle, tobacco money is funding local wars, because that's how the cycle works. And just me and my immature brain just going, I can't be part of that cycle. I can't be part of that narrative, and I can't be, even if my campaign had nothing to do with this, somewhere in that cycle, there is something not right about tobacco business, and what's happening in the world. And so I came back very junior in my role, and part of me was a little concerned that, okay, do I pull the plug or do I carry on? And I went to see my MD and I said, look, I love telling stories, but I have to tell stories that are ethically right for me. And that's when I said, I can't work on this account. I'll do anything else, but I just cannot work on this account. And I remember my MD, thinking they was going to fire me. He looked at me and goes, incredible respect for you standing up for what you believed in. And I don't think any other junior person that ever stood up for what they believed in. And that goes back to belief and discipline. And I held
And
on to those two things. And then that pivoted my career.
I think that that's a beautiful story, and especially because of so many elements of the things that we spoke about kind of like accumulate at this moment. And I feel like even earlier we were speaking about kind of like that work ethic that comes a little bit from Asian culture of delivering a good job, giving your best. I feel like there's sometimes another side of it where we whatever it is, we give our best, and we don't really question in a sense, we don't really stand up in a sense, and we try not to see if there's anything wrong in the equation, because we're very focused on giving our best, making sure our job is the best, which is great. It's just that there's the other side of it, which we may not see the harm, like that comes a few steps behind, like, or many steps in your case behind the work that we do. And even if we do, or at least from small stories that I've heard around, it's always that question of, will standing up for this affect my work, or will standing up for this affect my career? And especially as being a minority, that fear is much more and much more real, I would say, especially for someone like you in a company where everyone else may not share the same minority views as you. And I think that what you did was exemplary. What would you advise for everyone else in a similar situation who is struggling kind of like with that internal battle of not knowing, of having kind of like being programmed not to stand up for themselves, but having that spark which, oh gosh, I have to do something. I mean, you speak a lot about these ethical issues, and as much as you are exemplary, I've heard that not always like do people trust PR agencies to represent accurately the ethical issues that are happening out there.
Yeah.
So what's your advice to those in those situations? And I think it's a follow-up question. What is the responsibility of these companies to tell these stories ethically?
Okay, I'll answer the second question first because I personally believe that business, whatever the business is, are the greatest agents of change. And I'm stealing that quote from Mark Benioff, CEO of Salesforce, because I genuinely believe that. Businesses provide a space, an environment, and a product or a service that really does drive change, and they are the communities of change. But to the first question, it is I think, and again, what I do a lot today, particularly having, worked really hard to break the glass ceiling on so many things, particularly in my career, I think it comes with the responsibility, right? So this responsibility is about actually what I call braving uncomfortable conversations, and a lot of what I do in my both in my professional career and my personal advisory level is about talking about equality and equality across the spectrums of race, gender, sexuality, ability, and age. Right, and it's a fast-changing world. What I do think the younger generation actually has that gives them a lot of strength and power is the power of social media. When I grew up, we didn't have that, and I think, as I said before, in one of our older conversations, is when somebody says they're going to call you at 7:30 at night, you stay at home because you had a landline, and that was the moment the phone was going to ring. Right now, you get contacted at any time, day or night. You can literally, search in one of your social channels, and the multiple social channels at that as well. And you're keeping up with the speed of how fast culture is changing around the world, not just in your locale or vicinity, but anywhere in the world. You see things happening in real time. And I think that gives incredible strength. But also, because of that, because of social media, you get to see a lot of injustice. You get to see how things are happening. So you think about George Floyd here in the US and how it gave rise to the Black Lives Matter movement. And my niece, who was part Black, at the age of 17, led the Black Lives Matter protest in her hometown, right? So it gave her enough credibility, but power, but also passion to do something about this because it's visible. These inequalities are visible around the world, and I think it comes down to human spirit. You have to ask yourself: are you the type of person who just sits back and lets things happen, like let it walk over you, or you're the person that will brave that uncomfortable conversation? And sometimes it's not pleasant. It's not a pleasant conversation to have. And I think when I put my business hat on, my corporate hat on, I believe it's a responsibility, because I want a workforce that's diverse, not because I want to tick quotas and want to have a box. Yes, I've got Black people, I've got Asian people, I've got ethnic minorities or whatever, I've got LGBTQ, etc. It's not about that. I want a diverse workforce that reflects the world that we live in, because this is the world we live in. And if I'm going to create advertising, that's my nature of the business I work on right now. If I'm creating advertising and content, I want advertising and content that actually is relevant to who the world is. And that means people who need to work on this content need to have had lived experiences. And those lived experiences is when people are being embraced and also allowed to live their true lives, true authentic lives. So that for me is where I feel the real change happens.
And to quote the company that you're currently with, because brands should add to the world that they want to be part of, not distract from them. And I feel like that is very, very powerful. And I really see that you walk the talk in a sense. And I think that just hearing your story will probably inspire many others to do so.
I hope so.
I think so, definitely. Like personally, I feel like knowing that someone, that you are someone who like is from Kluang, that my family knows, like a lot of us would have probably heard about you and things like that, and to see all of that absolutely crazy brilliant things that you've done, I think it kind of opens up my mind in a sense. And I think to kind of like wind down and wrap up our interview, if you were to meet someone from a small town like Kluang, who was how you were, or if you were to travel back in time and meet you from the past, or someone akin to that, who probably would faint and die if they heard all of the amazing things that you did, what would you say to them for someone in that position?
Wow, powerful question. Never been asked that. I think my response would be nothing is impossible. Nothing is impossible. And if you hold on to, again, I go back to belief, self-belief, and discipline, your path may not be linear. It's not going to be just point A to point B because that's how everybody thinks life works. Your journey could be an amalgamation of different stepping stones that takes you in different directions. But if you have a vision and a dream, nothing is actually really impossible. And it's about believing in yourself and having the self-discipline to get you to the various stepping stones along the way, and being open to embracing what those stepping stones are. Never always imagining that's the end game, right? Like, as I said, when we started this conversation, did I ever think that this is where I'd end up today? Zero. I remember literally no qualms, no, not an inkling of a thought that I'd even leave Kluang, let alone leave Kluang and go to KL, and KL to London, London to New York, right? It is like never once thought about that. All I remember thinking about myself is I feel much bigger than who I am, and I need to follow that instinct. And I did. I followed my instincts, and I don't think instincts ever prove you wrong or steer you wrong. I just trusted in believing in myself and doing the best that I could, demonstrating my self-worth and being disciplined about that. So yes, I loved music, but I also knew the importance of studying and getting the correct education. And I was disciplined about that. I didn't just I want to do music, so I'm just going to faff about my education and get a really bad grade. I went, no, I know the importance. It's not because my parents put that fear factor in me. It's like, I know the importance of a good education. That was my upbringing. So I had a plan. As I said before, if nothing is ever guaranteed, but my plan was either it's going to be music or it's going to be a corporate career. Okay, music wasn't it. I made that pull. I could have carried on. I pulled that and said, I'm going to focus on this because I can do well here. And that's what I wanted. So I focused on that. I would say, there are no limits to that young Suresh. If I were to go back and meet him, like, there is no limitation to what you can do. You just have to embrace the journey ahead. Don't be afraid of that journey. And as I said, the journey is not linear. It can be in so many different ways.
Absolutely beautiful. And I have not yet, I'm sorry to disappoint you, I have not yet invented a time machine. But as someone, but as someone probably on the other side of the journey of life, I think that it means a lot to me, and I think it means a lot to our listeners today. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
You've been a joy to talk to and an honor to interview, in a sense. And I just hope you had as much fun as I did speaking to you.
So much fun.
And with that, I very sadly draw our episode of Changing Reality today to a close. To our audience, I'm so sorry I just completely ignored you this whole episode. But if you were talking to Suresh too, I'm sure you were as equally enraptured in his stories and his journey and his lessons as I was. And thank you guys so much for watching this episode. If you guys have any questions, drop it in the chat below and we'll take them another time. And as well as the same time, if you guys like today's episode, do join us again next week. We're on every Thursday at 10 p.m. ET. And wherever that is around the world for you guys. So thank you for tuning in. Until next time. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
You're listening to Changing Reality. Changing Reality, where we bend reality all across the world. Only on WQHS Radio.